You ever walk into a room where everyone stops laughing just long enough to laugh harder when they see you enter? That was the Drifter's life on Blight Moon 7, where his name meant exactly nothing and his ship smelled like burned noodles and betrayal. He pushed open the saloon doors wearing a patched duster that once belonged to someone important and a smile like he didn't notice half the galaxy considered him a joke. He didn't even make it 3-step before a pool cue broke across his back end. Someone yelled, "Hey Omega 5, fetch us a drink, will ya?" He didn't flinch, didn't speak, just looked up with blood pooling in his mouth, and grinned. That was the moment the galaxy started to die, and it began with a joke. Blight Moon 7 was the kind of place where your drink could shoot you back, and your waitress probably had an arrest warrant in 3 systems. No laws, no loyalties, only credits and curses. The Drifter shuffled to the bar stool, trying to shake the sawdust off his coat. It might have once been tan, now it was the color of desperation and engine grease. The bartender, a 4-eyed amphibious thing with sarcasm leaking from every pore, slid him a cracked glass of something that hissed as it settled. No one paid him any real attention. He was background static, another broken man limping his way across space. In the corner, 3 Slathery enforcers laughed so hard their mandibles clicked like castanets. They were watching a replay of his last failed skirmish, a grainy video of the Drifter crash landing into a merchant cruiser while trying to outrun a bill collector from the Drax Syndicate. The explosion wasn't even impressive, more like a balloon pop and a sad wheeze. They laughed so hard one nearly choked on his own tongue. The Drifter just stared at the screen, then leaned toward them calmly and said, "You boys ever wonder why the security feed cuts off right after that impact?" They paused, but the laugh resumed, because no one ever took him seriously. What no one saw was Rosie, his ship's AI, transmitting a silent data pulse through a forbidden channel to a decommissioned war satellite orbiting the ruins of Earth. One keyword embedded in a broken signal, Omega 5. The satellite awakened and sent a single ping through the outer mesh grid. That ping hit an old code buried so deep in the galactic network it hadn't been accessed in 70 years. Emergency Priority Protocol 7-9 unlocked. Only one person had clearance to use it. Back in the bar, someone smashed a bottle over the Drifter's head. He blinked, shrugged it off, and dragged himself to the bathroom mirror. His reflection stared back like it was ready to kill him. "We're gonna die in a puddle of spilled booze and bad choices again, aren't we?" he muttered to himself. Rosie's voice buzzed in his ear, soft and biting. "Maybe, but this time, we've got company. Remember that thing you activated?" "Yeah, it woke up a lot of sleeping giants." Meanwhile, in the upper sectors on a glass-floored observation deck, Warlord Grax of the Crimson Flame watched the transmission with eyes wide and one claw trembling. He didn't speak at first. His advisors tried laughing, brushing it off, until he slowly turned toward them, pale scales trembling, and said, "That name's not supposed to exist. If he's Omega 5, we're all already dead." Back on Blight Moon 7, things got loud fast. A bounty hunter recognized him from an old file, not the new memes, but an actual dossier classified by Earth's Dissolved Defense Division. Before the Drifter could wipe his mouth, laser bolts sizzled past his face. He dove behind the bar, laughing. Even as the ceiling exploded above him, the bartender screamed about unpaid tabs. The Drifter kicked over a crate of fermented slorg meat and used it to slide across the floor, gun in hand, not even aiming, just moving. On instinct, someone screamed, "That's Omega 5, and suddenly no one was laughing. He made it outside just in time to see Rosie, his ship, taking sniper fire from a rooftop. Her voice came over his comm link, "You have 30 seconds to get your sorry self into this junk pile, or I'm leaving you." He sprinted past open fires and crashed speeders, leaping over a stunned bounty hunter who tried to tase him with a fork. He hit the landing ramp and rolled inside. As Rosie closed the hatch mid-flight, they went vertical, scraping rust off a communications tower as they ascended through Blight Moon's smoky sky. In the cockpit, he collapsed into the pilot's chair, panting as sparks flew from the ceiling. Rosie spat static and said, "So great job, you triggered every ancient war protocol known to sentient life, and now half the galaxy's most unstable warlords know you're alive." He chuckled and wiped blood from his lip. "The good news is they only think I'm a legend. The bad news," Rosie said flatly, "is that you are one, and not the kind that dies peacefully in bed." 3 hours later, across the void in Sector 9'6, Warlords gathered via encrypted holochannels all had received the same transmission, Omega-5 active. One by one, they confirmed their data. What they remembered wasn't a man but a shadow, someone who ended wars with a whisper, someone who made governments collapse by deleting one line of code, someone who vanished without a trace decades ago, and someone none of them wanted to cross again. The drifter meanwhile was eating cereal out of a tin cup in his cabin, leg bandaged, and a smile growing on his face. He watched the stars flicker through the cracked window before turning to Rosie and saying, "They'll come for us now, won't they?" She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her voice was soft, almost reverent. "Yeah, they'll come with everything, but we've got something they don't." "What's that?" he asked as he poured more cereal in the cup. He looked like a man who'd just been fired from a bad job and didn't care anymore. Rosie's lights flickered. Then she replied, "You know who you are." He stopped chewing, stared out the window as the blackness of space stretched ahead, and for the first time in years he smiled, not the forced kind, not the broken one, but the kind that said he remembered what it felt like to be feared. The joke had ended. The galaxy just didn't know it yet. The ship hummed like a sleeping beast, its ancient engines pulsing in rhythm with the low static of the cosmos. The drifter sat in the pilot's chair, boots kicked up, face lit by the glow of blinking red warnings that he routinely ignored. Outside the viewport, the stars blurred into long streaks as Rosie warped through forgotten corridors of deep space, charting paths no sane navigator would dare use. Somewhere behind him, the ship groaned, a sound like a tired ghost trying to remember how to haunt properly. Rosie's voice cracked through the silence with her usual edge. "You know you're being tracked by 5 different factions right now, give or take 2 bounty guilds and 1 really offended casino manager." The drifter didn't respond immediately. He was staring at an old photo wedged into the corner of the console. A blurry shot of a smiling crew, now all gone or worse. He finally muttered, "Let them come. I'm not hiding anymore." Rosie wasn't buying the sudden surge of courage. She adjusted thrusters, tilting slightly to dodge a meteor field drifting like lazy fish across the lane. "You said the same thing last time, and the time before that, and you still ended up drinking fermented squid milk in a dive bar surrounded by idiots with stun guns." The drifter cracked a smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. "This time's different. I called it. Omega-5 is active. They know." She paused for a second, something almost human in her hesitation. "Then it's not just them who know. Earth knows too." That shut him up. Earth hadn't contacted him in years, not since the operation went to hell and his name was erased from every system that mattered. Not since they made him a ghost. Hours passed before they reached the data vault. It wasn't really a station anymore, more like the rotting spine of one, floating in orbit around a failed mining moon. A place where memories went to die. The outer hull looked like it had been chewed on by something large and bored. No lights, no guards, just silence and time. Rosie circled it once before docking. "You're sure about this?" she asked. "The last time you accessed one of these things you got shot, then electrocuted, then very briefly on fire." The drifter checked his sidearm and adjusted the scarf around his neck. "That was different. That vault was actually guarded. This one's just haunted." He stepped through the airlock and into the cold metal ribs of forgotten history. The vault's interior was darker than expected. He moved through corridors filled with static slick monitors and broken droids slumped like discarded toys. Dust floated in thick, lazy wave. Everything here smelled like wet copper and betrayal. Eventually, he reached the central terminal. It took a few minutes and some old-fashioned threats to get the backup system to boot. As the flickering screen came to life, files began to scroll. Military logs, defunct commands, and one name repeated in a language that stuttered around each letter like it was scared to pronounce it. Omega-5. He inserted a cracked data stick and whispered the command. The terminal froze, then flashed a line across the screen. Identity confirmed. Classification restored. Threat level critical. Protocol awakening in progress. The sound that followed wasn't mechanical. It was like a scream across time. Somewhere deep in the vault something shifted, doors unlocking after decades of silence. And with that unlock came memories. Not just digital ones. His own. He staggered back, eyes wide as flashes poured into his mind. A battle over the moons of Ceres, a child pulled from burning wreckage, a friend with blood on her hands whispering goodbye. The cost of being Omega-5 wasn't just secrecy. It was survival without meaning. All of it came flooding back, sharp and unforgiving. He fell to his knees, breathing hard, sweat trickling down his temple as Rosie's voice crackled through his earpiece. Your vitals just spiked. What's happening in there? Talk to me. He managed a choked laugh, wiped his mouth with his sleeve. I remember now. I remember everything. This wasn't just a protocol. This was a kill switch. If I activated it, it meant Earth knew the weapon was live again. The one buried in the outer systems. Rosie didn't speak at first. Then she said quietly, You know what that means, don't you? If they know, they'll send them. The ones who clean up the mess. He nodded. Yeah. And they won't care who I save. Just who I was. Back aboard Rosie, the data decrypted slowly, old footage and mission logs streaming into her systems. She processed them in silence, watching her pilot pace like a caged animal. The files told of a covert team called the Echo Spectres, Earth's last resort unit. Omega-5 wasn't a title. It was a warning. The fifth time the unit had to be used, entire colonies disappeared. Entire warlords were erased from the map, not with bombs but with something much more efficient. Him. Rosie finally spoke. You were supposed to be decommissioned. Why did they keep your access alive? The drifter sat down and stared at his shaking hands. I think someone knew this was coming. Someone higher up. They kept me off the records but left me active. Just in case. Just in case what she asked. Just in case the weapon ever woke up again. The drifter opened a new file, labeled Event 0. Coordinates glowed on the screen. A planet in the outlier region, surrounded by dead satellites and fractured moons. No traffic, no trade, not even smugglers. The last place anyone would look. According to the logs, the superweapon's power source had been dormant since the fall. Until now. That's where we're going, he said quietly. Rosie didn't argue. She just adjusted the course. As the ship turned, stars drifted past like forgotten gods watching from afar. Later, as they sat in silence, Rosie finally asked something she never had before. Do you regret it? The drifter didn't answer right away. Then he whispered, I regret not finishing the job. I regret trusting the people who ordered it. But mostly I regret living long enough for the joke to catch up with me. She didn't say anything after that. The stars stretched again, and somewhere behind them the warlords were no longer laughing. They were listening. And what they heard now was fear. Because the drifter wasn't running anymore. He was remembering. And the galaxy was about to remember too. They called it the Crimson Notice. A signal pulse that hit every known bounty network within a 5-system radius. The warlord Vegra didn't like subtlety. Her version of a bounty wasn't a whisper in the shadows or a discreet contract. No, she broadcasted it in 5 languages, with animation and music. The drifter's image blinked on every screen from low-orbit rest stops to back-alley dens on Gas Giant. A reward of 10 million credits, dead or slightly alive, preferably dead. Vegra's message was simple. Bring me Omega-5. Bring me the ghost who thinks he can rise. And make sure he screams when he arrives. The galaxy responded the only way it knew how. With chaos. Somewhere between dead space and a radiation storm, Rosie picked up the signal. The drifter didn't flinch when it hit their screens. He leaned in close, squinting at his own face. That's not even a good photo. Rosie replied dryly, You blinked during the orbital chase on Moraxis. That's the best they had. Also, they edited your scar to make it look like a fashion statement. He shook his head, stood up, and began pacing. They moved faster than I expected. Vegra must have had people watching the vault. Rosie corrected him, everyone was watching the vault. You woke up a ghost protocol. It echoed across 4 dead networks and 1 still active Earth channel. You're trending on 10 bounty forums and 2 conspiracy blogs. He stopped pacing and stared out the viewport. I need to disappear. Rosie replied immediately, we're already in dark space. No beacon, no trace, no trail. You're as invisible as you're going to get without turning into plasma. He nodded, but his hands twitched. The old reflexes were kicking in. He wasn't just being hunted. He was being remembered. That was worse. Memory had power in this galaxy, especially when it belonged to monsters who used to wear medals. The first attempt came 2 hours later. A sleek vessel, no markings, just a shimmer in the void. Rosie didn't even detect it until it was practically kissing their hull. A boarding tube latched silently onto the airlock, and the alarms didn't go off. That was the scariest part. Rosie whispered into his ear, "You've got company. No ID. No comms. I've locked the bridge, but they're already inside." He drew his weapon, a battered old slug thrower with etchings he no longer remembered carving. He moved through the ship silently, every step measured. The corridors twisted like a puzzle, tight and unpredictable, filled with old maintenance bots and long-dead experiments. He found her in the galley. She was sipping his last can of synth coffee, sitting cross-legged on the counter, her long braid trailing down her back like a whip waiting to strike. She didn't raise her weapon. She just looked at him and smiled. "You don't look like a myth," she said. "You look tired." He didn't lower his gun. "Who sent you?" She shrugged. "Everyone. No one. I got the signal, followed the scent. I figured I'd be killing a ghost or dying trying. Instead, I find you drinking bad coffee and talking to a ship that insults you." Rosie cut in immediately, "I do not insult. I provide emotional balance." The drifter stepped forward, weapon still aimed. "Why aren't you shooting?" She sighed and slid off the counter. "Because if you're really Omega-5, I don't stand a chance. And if you're not, someone else will kill you in 24 hours anyway. Either way, I don't get paid until they know for sure." He studied her, the way she stood, the slight shift in weight, the eyes that never blinked at the wrong moment. "You're not a standard hunter." She grinned. "Never said I was. Name's Aaron. And I think I might like being wrong about you." She didn't attack. Instead, she walked past him, hands raised in mock surrender, and let Rosie scan her. No weapons on her except the one in plain sight, no explosives, no trace nanotech. Either she was clean or really good at hiding. Rosie muttered in his ear, "She's dangerous. Not reckless. That makes her worse." Aaron spent the next few hours lounging in the cargo bay, flipping knives and asking pointed questions he didn't answer. But she didn't press. She just watched. And listened. That was worse. People who listened could be a problem. The real trouble came later, when the bounty ping went wide again and the signal pulled in more than just amateurs. A Drax Syndicate cruiser appeared on the edge of Rosie's sensor range, flanked by 2 older but heavily armed escort ships. Rosie didn't wait for permission. She went evasive, diving into a nearby asteroid field like a drunk eel in a broken pipe. The drifter stumbled into the cockpit, grabbed the seat, and shouted, "How many?" Rosie replied calmly, "Enough to make dying look like a good time." Aaron slid into the seat next to him, strapping in with a grin. "I knew sticking around would be fun." The asteroid field was tight, with gravitational eddies and debris the size of houses tumbling through space like angry gods playing dice. The enemy ships didn't hesitate. They followed them in, firing ion blasts and scatter charges. Rosie weaved between rocks, skimming surfaces so close the hull sparked. Aaron manned the rear guns, firing blindly and laughing like a lunatic. The drifter rerouted power from life support to thrusters, then muttered, "We're going to crash." Rosie snapped back, "Only if you steer like you sleep. Unconscious and useless." He twisted the controls, pulling a hard dive beneath a collapsing ridge of stone. One of the escorts clipped an asteroid and exploded in a shower of fire and fragments. Aaron whooped. "That's one." The drifter growled, "That still leaves two." Rosie whispered, "Not for long. I have a surprise." She redirected power to an experimental coil buried deep in the ship's core. With a shudder, Rosie released a pulse of electromagnetic noise so dense it shorted out every nearby sensor. The remaining ships went blind. One veered left into solid rock. The last one kept firing, blind and furious, until Rosie doubled back and delivered a plasma burst to its engines. It exploded in silence, a flower of light in the dark. When it was over, the drifter sat back, breathing hard, sweat dripping down his temple. Aaron clapped him on the shoulder. "That was beautiful. Messy, but beautiful." He didn't respond. He was staring at the wreckage, mind racing. They weren't supposed to find me that fast. Aaron tilted her head. Maybe they didn't. Maybe someone's telling them where to look. That thought lingered like a bad smell. Rosie didn't speak. Neither did he. Hours later, while patching a fuel line, the drifter spoke without looking up. "Why didn't you kill me?" Aaron, leaning against the wall, answered honestly. "Because I think the stories might be true. And if they are, then killing you won't change a damn thing. It'll just speed up the end." He nodded slowly. "Then get some rest. We're going to need it." The galaxy was starting to close in. And somewhere out there, the warlords had stopped laughing. They were preparing. And for the first time in years, he was too. The silence after the chase was louder than the explosions. Rosie cruised through dead space with her hull still smoking and her systems groaning like she needed a drink and a long vacation. The drifter sat alone in the dark of the command deck, fingers drumming against his knee as data from the vault continued to unravel. Aaron had finally stopped pestering him with questions and fallen asleep near the engine core, curled up with a blanket made from heat-insulating foil and an old tactical vest. Outside, the stars barely moved. It was the kind of quiet that made old soldiers restless, that made him remember things better left buried. Then it came. A ping on the private comms band. One not used in years. It cut through everything else, a whisper against the skull, an encryption that carried weight like gravity. Rosie paused mid-calibration and said in a tone she rarely used, "We're getting a signal from Earth." The drifter straightened. His heart didn't race. It froze. "Patch it through," he said, voice tight. The screen blinked. Static formed shapes. Then a face appeared. Older than memory, scarred, with an eye replaced by polished steel. The voice followed, low and rough and impossible. "Omega-5, you were not authorized to activate the legacy signal. But since you did, congratulations. You just made yourself visible to everything we hoped would stay dead." The drifter leaned in. "I thought you were gone. You were listed as Kia during the Cassidian sweep." The voice smiled, humorless. "I was. Then someone rewrote the entry. Not for me. For you. We let you walk because we needed a ghost. But now the ghosts are waking up. And they remember you." The transmission cut off with coordinates burned into the NAV screen. Rosie ran them twice. "It's a planet. Outer rim. No colony, no name, no atmosphere fit for breathing. But there's a pulse coming from it. Faint, old tech. The kind that predates the fall." Aaron emerged from the corridor, hair a mess and gun in hand. "I had a dream someone was whispering murder into my ears. Turns out I was right. What's going on?" The drifter stood, already pulling on his coat. "We're heading to a place no one talks about. The place where the weapon was buried." Aaron raised an eyebrow. "You mean the weapon we're not supposed to believe in? The one that can supposedly restart stars or crush them?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The journey took 2 days. Rosie navigated like she was on edge, voice clipped, sensors dialed to maximum. They approached the planet through a field of debris that looked like the shredded bones of ships that had gotten too close. The world itself was gray and lifeless, covered in rusted plates of metal and ancient towers that jutted from the surface like broken fingers. Rosie scanned the ground. "There's a structure at the pole. Buried under 5 kilometers of reinforced alloy and something else. I can't scan through it. That's not normal. That's not even science." Aaron checked her rifle. So we're landing on a cursed rock that eats signals and probably screams at night. Perfect. They touched down with a crunch, dust kicking up into clouds of coppery ash. The drifter led the way, guided by memory and an old beacon frequency that seemed to throb against the inside of his skull. They moved through abandoned corridors filled with silence and stale air, old warning signs in languages no one spoke anymore. Eventually they reached a door that wasn't a door. It was alive, humming with ancient power, its surface etched with a symbol that hadn't been seen since the fall. Aaron stared at it and said flatly, "That's not just a vault. That's a containment seal. What the hell did they bury here?" The drifter placed his hand against it. The seal recognized him. Lines of light spread from his fingers like veins of fire. The door dissolved. Inside was not what they expected. A chamber, round and massive, filled with what looked like stars. Suspended spheres of light and code floated above metal pylons. In the center was a console, blinking slowly. Rosie's voice came through their earpieces, struggling to stay connected. "This isn't a weapon. This is a seed. A planetary recoder. It doesn't destroy. It remakes. The weapon everyone feared wasn't built to end life. It was built to reset it." Aaron stepped closer, watching one of the spheres flicker and shift. "It's rewriting biology, physics, maybe even time. Who made this?" The drifter said nothing. Because he already knew. Earth hadn't made it. Not alone. The files from the vault had hinted at an ancient partnership. Something pre-human. A force that once tried to help guide development before deciding the galaxy wasn't ready. When the wars broke out, they left behind a few tools. Just in case. This was one of them. And now someone had reactivated it. Not to help, but to reshape the galaxy in their image. He turned to leave. "We have to shut it down." Aaron didn't move. "If we do, what's the alternative?" "The Warlords take control. They already know this exists. They'll come here. One of them will find a way to use it. And we won't get another chance." The drifter snapped, "If we use this, we're no better than them. We don't get to play God. We barely manage being human." Before the argument could boil over, Rosie screamed in their ears. "Incoming. Multiple ships. Warlord signatures. Vagra is here. And she's not alone." The sky above lit up as ships descended, blasting fire into the upper towers. They had tracked the signal, followed it like bloodhounds. Now they wanted what was inside. The drifter and Aaron raced back through the corridor, sealed doors behind them. Explosions rocked the ground. Rosie reported damage to the hull. "I can't lift off. Not without losing pressure." "You're grounded." The drifter cursed and rerouted emergency power to the outer defenses. He handed Aaron a detonator. "If they reach the core, set it off." She stared at him. "You planning on making a stand?" He nodded. She grinned. "I was hoping you'd say that." The Warlords came with everything. Troops in heavy armor, mechs with railguns, air support that turned the upper ruins into molten slag. The drifter fought like he'd never left the field. Aaron was a blur beside him, gunfire echoing through the dust-choked air. Rosie, partially linked to the facility, activated old defense systems that fired beams of light into the night. But they were outnumbered, outgunned. Holding the line was impossible. They fell back, inch by inch, closer to the core. Then Rosie said something strange. "Another signal's arriving. Not enemy. Familiar. It's Earth. And they're not here to help." The drifter looked up just as a new fleet dropped from warp. Sleek, black, silent. The cleanup crew. They didn't ask questions. They didn't send warnings. They just started firing on everything. The drifter's past had arrived. Not to save, but to erase. And now, in the middle of the firestorm, he had to choose who to stop first. The Warlords who wanted to rewrite reality. Or the ghosts who wanted to erase him for remembering it. Ask ChatGPT. The world was burning around him, and still he stood. The sky above the dead planet crackled with gunfire and broken promises. The Warlords were storming the lower chambers, screaming with greed and madness, while Earth's Black Ops fleet began glassing the surface from orbit. The drifter crouched behind what remained of a collapsed defense node, pulse rifle clutched in his hands, his knuckles white with the strain of holding back not just enemies, but memories. Erin was next to him, breathing hard, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat and ash. She glanced sideways at him, and asked the question without needing words. "What now?" He looked at her, eyes older than his face, voice like gravel soaked in guilt. "Now we find out if I'm still the monster they trained me to be." Down below, inside the core chamber, the ancient seed hummed louder. The rewriting had begun. No one had fully activated it yet, but the systems were waking, responding to presence, conflict, desperation. The Warlords hadn't even realized that their very emotions were triggering its protocols. It was not a weapon of command. It was one of reaction. The more fear and violence it sensed, the closer it came to unleashing its rewrite wave. Rosie warned them from the comm link, her voice strained, "I can't hold the ship intact much longer. Earth's fleet is using graviton bursts. My shielding wasn't built for sustained orbital fire. You need to move. You need to move now." But he couldn't move. Not yet. Because in that moment, as another explosion flared nearby and dust rained from the cracked ceiling, he was trapped in a memory. The final mission. The real one. Not the one filed in the Earth archives, redacted and buried under layers of bureaucratic silence. This one was raw and loud and full of screaming. He remembered the child in the bunker, covered in blood that wasn't her own. He remembered the scream of his friend Mila as she activated the core overload in her suit, taking out an entire battalion to protect him. He remembered the last transmission from his commander. "If you survive, forget everything. Especially who you are." But he didn't forget. Not fully. Not forever. And now those fragments had returned like splinters in his mind, pulling him back to the man he used to be. Rosie's voice broke through again, softer this time, and closer. "I unlocked the personal log. You left it in me. I don't know why. Maybe you wanted to forget. But I played it. I listened. I know who you are. And I know what you did." The drifter exhaled slowly. "Then you know I don't deserve to walk away from this." Rosie replied instantly. "Maybe not. But that doesn't mean you're done." Erin pulled him back to the present, grabbing his collar and dragging him out of the path of a thermal charge. "You can sit there and drown in regret later, but right now I need the guy who made Warlords cry in their sleep. Because if you don't do something in the next 10 minutes, we're all going to be rewritten into atomic soup." The drifter nodded, stood, and flipped a switch on his rifle that hadn't been used in decades. A thin blue light spread across the barrel. Ancient Earth tech. Pre-fall weaponry. Experimental. Unstable. Perfect for today. They moved through the ruins like ghosts, fast and invisible, taking out forward units and dodging pulse beams that lit the shadows like firestorms. The Warlords had gone mad with ambition. One of them, a horned brute from the Inferna Syndicate, reached the inner ring of the core and tried to interface directly. His body twisted, burned from the inside, rewritten mid-sentence. His scream echoed as his molecules refused to obey his DNA. The weapon didn't want him. It wanted something purer. Someone with authority. Someone like the drifter. He and Erin reached the final chamber as Earth's elite units breached the surface, dropping down in sleek black suits with emotionless helmets and rifles that hummed like execution orders. The commander of the unit stepped forward. A woman with a face the drifter recognized. Older, colder, but familiar. She was the one who trained him. Who named him Omega-5. Her voice sliced through the chamber. "You were not meant to survive. You were meant to disappear. The moment you activated the signal, you voided your expiration clause." He raised his weapon. "So you're here to clean the mess." She didn't blink. "We're here to make sure the galaxy doesn't fall under false heroes with broken minds." The standoff pulsed with tension. Rosie whispered in his ear, "She has remote access to the satellite array. If she triggers the override, she can reduce this planet to dust. But the weapon will go with it. No one wins. Aaron asked, so what's the plan? The drifter took one step forward and said loudly, you're too late. The rewrite already started. But it's not writing for them. It's writing for me. The commander frowned. That's impossible. You don't have full genetic clearance. You were only partial seed. He smiled. That's what they told me. But what they didn't know was that Mila uploaded her sequence into me before she died. The override was never yours. It was ours. And you buried the only key in the one man you wanted to forget. The weapon pulsed as if it heard him. Light spread across the chamber, wrapping around him in waves. The Earth team opened fire. But the light absorbed the blast. Aaron fired back, picking off their flank. Rosie, now linked fully into the weapon's core, began redirecting power. The chamber erupted in chaos. The drifter stood at the center, glowing, his body outlined in code. The seed had chosen. Not because he was perfect, but because he was broken in the right shape. Rosie's voice was steady now. I can rewrite one zone. A limited burst. You decide. Wipe the Earth team. Wipe the Warlords. Or wipe yourself. But you can't do all three. He looked at Aaron, then at the commander, then at the Warlords screaming as the weapon twisted the air around them. He whispered, I'm tired of people making choices for me. Then he gave Rosie the order. The pulse hit like silence. A wave of white that wasn't light, wasn't sound, just emptiness, perfect and still. When it passed, the chamber was quiet. The Warlords were gone. Erased. Their data stripped, their patterns undone. The Earth team was frozen, their weapons disabled, unable to move. The commander looked at him, rage in her eyes. You killed our control. The drifter stepped forward. No. I took it back. Rosie powered down the weapon, the chamber dimming. The seed returned to dormancy, satisfied. Aaron approached him slowly. You didn't wipe yourself. He shook his head. I'm not done yet. There's still more to fix. She looked at him with something like hope. Then let's fix it. Together. Above, the Earth fleet retreated. Orders withdrawn. Mission incomplete. They had seen what he could do. And they would think twice before returning. For now. Rosie spoke one last time, voice lighter than ever. Omega 5. Status updated. Not missing. Not dead. Not forgotten. Just alive. And finally awake. The galaxy was quiet in the aftermath, but it was not peace. It was the kind of quiet that came after a storm when the survivors looked around and asked themselves what had been lost and what still remained. The drifter stood atop the ridge overlooking the now dormant seed buried beneath the shattered surface of the planet. The scars of the battle still marked the land, black streaks of char across the metal crust and the skeletons of burned-out war machines half sunken into the ash. Aaron was beside him, arms crossed, eyes scanning the stars as if expecting another fleet to drop in at any moment. None did. For now the galaxy held its breath. Rosie's voice was softer than usual, almost cautious. Long-range scans show Earth's fleet has withdrawn entirely. No signals. No pursuit. Just silence. But we both know that means they're watching from afar. The drifter nodded slowly. Watching. Waiting. Maybe even recalculating. That's fine. Let them. I'm done running. If they want to come for me again, they'd better bring something stronger than guilt and memory. Aaron smirked. They'll bring politics. That's always worse. He didn't laugh, but his lips twitched. A shadow of who he'd been when this all began. Back on Rosie's deck, the systems were stabilizing. The damage from the earlier assault had been extensive. Hull fractures sealed with temporary welds, power relays rerouted through backup channels, and two of the main engines were still running hot enough to warp the floor beneath them. But she was alive. Just like him. Barely, but alive. Rosie hummed as she ran diagnostics, muttering to herself like an old woman counting her scars. When the drifter entered, she didn't greet him. She simply opened a console file. One last data packet had been unlocked after the weapon deactivated. A message. Encrypted. Old clearance level. Higher than Omega 5. He played it. The voice that filled the room was one he hadn't heard in years. Calm, steady, the voice of the man who had recruited him all those lifetimes ago. If you're hearing this, then you've done what we all knew you might someday do. You broke protocol. You stepped beyond the leash we wrapped around your neck. And for that, I want to say thank you. Because it means you're still human. It means we didn't break you completely. But listen closely. This isn't the end. What you stopped was only one node. There are more. Seeds like that one scattered across uncharted systems. We didn't bury them. We found them. We were never the architects, just the thieves. The file ended there. No location data. No clues. Just a whisper of a bigger truth hiding in the void. The drifter stared at the screen, fingers tapping slowly on the edge of the console. Aaron leaned in over his shoulder. You know what this means, don't you? This isn't the end of the road. This is the map opening up. He nodded once. A slow and tired motion. We've been playing in a corner of something we never understood. Rosie added in her driest tone, and of course we have no idea where the next one is, how it works, or who else knows. This is very on-brand for you. The drifter smiled faintly. Then we do what we've always done. We drift. And we find out. The next few days were spent preparing, repairing, rebuilding. Rosie cannibalized pieces of one of the Warlord ships left in orbit, merging alien tech into her own systems like patching a wound with foreign blood. She liked it more than she let on. Aaron set up comms relays disguised as debris, spreading false signals and dummy pings across several sectors. Anyone trying to track them would get stuck in a maze of misinformation. The drifter updated his old gear, modified his weapons, and recorded a message of his own. He didn't broadcast it. Not yet. But he stored it inside Rosie, ready to be released if he didn't come back from wherever they were going next. One night, if it could be called night on a planet without a sun, Aaron found him sitting outside the ship, staring at the stars like he was trying to find someone in them. She dropped beside him, wordless at first. Then she said, "You could have let the weapon erase you. Taken the clean way out. You didn't." He was quiet for a long time. When he finally answered, his voice was low and rough. "Because I want to remember. Even the bad parts. Especially the bad parts. Someone needs to carry the truth, even if it hurts." Aaron didn't reply. But she didn't leave either. When Rosie was ready, she opened the star map again. No coordinates stood out. No obvious direction. But the drifter picked a route anyway. Based on instinct. Based on gut. Based on the kind of feeling you only get when you've seen too much and still believe there might be something more out there worth saving. As the ship lifted off from the ruined world and cut through the atmosphere, Rosie whispered, "Course set. Drift velocity stable. No flags. No threats. For now." Aaron strapped in and cracked her knuckles. First one to spot trouble wins. The drifter adjusted his seat and grinned. "What do I get if I lose?" She shrugged. "You already did. You came back from the dead and you're still trying. That's not winning. That's insanity." Rosie broke in with a cheerful beat. "You two done flirting, or should I put on music? Something explosive." The ship jumped. Stars stretched. The void opened. And they were gone. Far behind them, deep in a station long abandoned and darker than death, another terminal lit up. A signal pinged. One that recognized the activation of the seed. A shape moved in the shadows. Not human. Not machine. Something older. Watching. Waiting. And smiling. Somewhere, a voice without a body whispered, "Omega 5. We see you." Phase 2 begins. The galaxy wasn't laughing anymore. It was listening. And this time, the punchline had just started.